Welcome to Things I Learned in my PhD so you don't have to do one, a series where I talk to PhDs and soon-to-bes about the lessons they learned in their PhD that either transform them or traumatize them. Either way, you won't have to do one. My guest today is Dr. Anisa Morava. Anisa defended her PhD in 2024 at Western University in Canada in the field of kinesiology. I got that right? It was last year?
Yeah,
I thought so, honestly.
I think,
Uh,
yeah.
it's been a while. Fun fact about Anisa, she owns 37 purebred Siamese cats and loves to name them from least to most favorite. Anisa,
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Yo. Actually, yeah, really into the Siamese cats, and I'm gonna dive into that a little later in today's podcast.
some would think that 37 is too many, but not you.
Not me, no.
Before we tap into your wisdom for real, can you tell me a little bit about your PhD and what your experience with it was? I have a little bit of an idea because, obviously we were in the same lab for a couple of years, but tell me about your experience.
Thanks, Yo. Yeah, so I guess I can start off with how I sort of got involved in kinesiology. So I started in psychology and neuroscience at Mac. And I think one of my highlights from that experience was actually the research placement that we had to do as part of our program. So after doing that, I thought, okay, this is something that I could see myself getting more involved in.
Hmm.
But I really wanted to work with people. So when I was looking for different labs, I stumbled across kinesiology and I thought, wow, there's people actually looking at how exercise can impact cognition or like how we navigate our everyday lives. So that's sort of how I stumbled upon doing my master's in kinesiology at Western. And I thought, you know what, let's just do some more schools.
Keep it
So
rolling.
yeah, the classic, right? So I ended up doing my PhD really looking at the effects of a single bout of exercise. So one exercise session and how that impacts stress reactivity. So that's our response to a stressor. So the first study was really looking at what's been done already and what are some gaps that we could fill. And then the second and third study were really building on that and using essentially a single bout of exercise to see whether it could buffer stress in students and whether that has any impact on their learning outcomes. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of what the focus is in undergrad is how people are performing academically. So
Yeah.
anything that can kind of help reduce the stress that a lot of people are experiencing in undergrad was sort of like the focus of my project.
Right. So for those that may be less familiar, what is kind of the research say? Like how much exercise, what kind of exercise is kind of beneficial for buffering stress?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'll start a little bit back on how this sort of field of research started. So, one area that was interesting was looking at, well, athletes. Like they exercise quite regularly. They're chronic exercisers, one might say. And what they noticed was in these chronic exercisers, they had blunted, so lower blood pressure responses to a stressful event.
Right.
So that's where there was some, early connections on, wait a minute, like what is this role of exercising have to do with responding to a stressor?
Yeah.
So there's this sort of cross stressor adaptation hypothesis. We love the long words.
Yeah, of course,
Right.
of course.
But this hypothesis kind of states that if you are exercising your body, it activates the same flight or fight response.
Yeah.
But if you do that repeatedly, there's adaptation to this system. So it gets better at not reacting as much and sort of recovering faster. And that's how the connection between exercise and stress sort of was looked into. In terms of what is, people always want to know this, like what is the optimal exercise or like
Of course,
what is the
maximize my life.
yeah, right. Like, especially with a lot of the other exercise podcasts out there, it's really about like, what is the magic dose?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that people need to sort of take away is any movement is helpful.
Yeah.
But at least in terms of the stress buffering, a lot of the research has suggested that a moderate intensity of exercise, so that's exercise where, it's getting a little more difficult to keep up a conversation,
Right.
is the range where you're getting some of those changes to the body that might be able to buffer a stressor.
Right. So in a way, the way that I've kind of thought about it, and you can tell me if this is off base, is like You know how when people get bitten by, or they're trying to like build immunity? I was gonna
Yes.
say to snake venom, but literally, I guess I could just say vaccines. So you know how vaccines work?
Woo!
Yeah, effectively, kind of like that, right? Like you're kind of just getting your body used to that kind of stress response, and so when it does feel it, exercise kind of is like, oh well, it's not that bad.
That's right. Exactly. So it's sort of training your body's systems that already get activated to
Yeah,
respond to a different type of stressor. Exactly.
right. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So tell me then, based off of the stressors that you had to experience in grad school and,
Mm.
reading and learning all about that and going through the process of it, as we know it can be stressful, what's the lesson that you learned?
Yeah, so I think the lesson that I learned during my PhD is like how to look at evidence. So a
Okay.
lot of the time in research, we're taught, first let's go to the literature. What has already been done
Yeah.
about this topic to try to identify, is there a body of evidence for a specific area? And then it's a lot about like looking at the quality. So there's different levels of evidence, as we've talked about. There's
Yeah.
sometimes what we get colloquially is like anecdotal evidence. So it's
A
like
friend of
when
a
you're,
friend told me.
yeah, and my one friend did this one exercise and it
Yeah.
just changed her life, and maybe it did.
Yeah.
But I think what we want to talk about, like on average in a larger sample, are we seeing a specific type of trend?
Right.
And another thing that I would say is that a lot of times, especially in social media or the news, one study gets highlighted. They're
Yeah.
like, wow, this 1 minute workout was able to reduce this specific biomarker by this percentage. And it's like, let's take a step back.
Okay.
And first of all, look at the article and make some judgments based on, what was the study design? Was it a randomized control trial where, half of the participants were randomized to receiving that exercise and the other half didn't? You can also look at things like, well, what was the population? So I know
Undergrad psych class. The
exactly. We've
classic.
talked about the classic psychology pool of undergraduate students.
Yeah.
There's also the self-selection bias, right? Of, people who enjoy exercise might see an exercise study and want to do it.
Yeah.
So you're getting a very specific population. So it's really difficult then to extrapolate the results from that specific study to the general public.
Mhm.
And then we go into, okay, we looked at this one study, but like, what do the other studies say? So that kind of moves into, the systematic review where, we get that collection of articles and we're pooling the results and synthesizing them together to
Yeah.
get a sense of where are we landing on this intervention, and maybe what are the factors that modify those results.
Yeah.
So I think one thing I learned throughout the PhD was getting more critical about looking at the evidence. And, we made mistakes. Like there's so many moments where you see this amazing study, on social, and you're like, wait, wow, that's cool. And you might pass that information along to others without also taking a look at the article. And I
Yeah.
think that's a big lesson that I learned throughout those years.
For sure. There's I think so much of the PhD as you described is like learning those skills involved in basically being like, how do I evaluate? How do I appraise this study, right? Because like so
Mhm.
much of it is, well, I got to learn how to do research first. And in learning how to do research, you learn what makes good research, what makes less good research, right? And I remember talking about this with somebody else just about like, I think research as a verb is one of those things that I think is just maybe too broad, right? Like
Mm.
when we think about like, oh, I think somebody else is like, oh yeah, I cooked this thing, right? Like that involves so many different techniques. That involves so many different ways that you can do it. You can be a good cook, you can be a bad cook, right? It's like saying that you cook something isn't enough to tell me enough about this thing. And so I think it's very similar when you say like, oh, I researched this thing, to then say like, well, like how closely did you research? Where did you source these things, right? Is it like a Google search? Is
Mhm.
it a primary literature search? Is it, and then like you said, going into the actual article itself and being like, okay, well, like who was the population and what kind of design did they run? I think I think you raise a really good point. I think, and maybe I'll get your take on this. What are you seeing kind of the missteps right now of when you people not really evaluating critically this kind of research?
Yeah, so I think one of those I'm seeing a lot is on social media.
Yeah.
And I think where it is it's the frequency at which things are coming out is so high.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. It's really difficult to be able to stay up to date on all the articles that are coming out, and that volume creates, time pressures, not just on regular people, but also on, PhD students and scientists. I want to make it very clear that just because you have a PhD doesn't mean that you can fall into those traps. I've fallen into them myself,
Yeah.
where, I watched a documentary one time and was so compelled by their storytelling that I was influenced to be like, maybe I should try this specific diet.
Yeah.
And then when I went into looking at the documentary and who was funding it,
Yeah.
I completely missed this bias that was present. So I think one of them is the speed at which things are coming out. It makes it hard to keep up and vet.
Yeah.
Another thing is some of these clickbait titles, right? It goes into the journalism piece where sometimes the scientists are doing their very best to communicate the nuance, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, this was done in kinesiology students. But
Yeah.
then when the article title is, this exercise is going to make you look a certain way, full stop. There's no mention on any of the nuances or limitations in the study. So part of it, I think, is our science communication and our journalism. It's driven by likes and by engagement. It's not necessarily driven by, making sure you capture the nuances. I had an interesting experience where I was interviewed to talk about one of my studies. And, the journalist I work with did a great job trying to capture what I had shared, but there were still some jumps that they made that I had to go back to them and be like, we need to kind of like tone down some of the statements. As much as you want people to look at this, we don't want to make claims that aren't substantiated by one study that I did in my master's,
Absolutely. I think you raised such a fantastic point about the goals of academia, the goals of research, and the goals of journalism are not the same, right? You're kind of taking this same piece of information, and on one side, you're at the academic side, you're trying to provide as much sort of context, nuance, kind of description of like the exact thing that you looked at. And on the other side, it's like, well, who's got time to read through a, 18, 20 page research article and not even really understand what's happening in it, right? Just give me the thing and how it relates to me and how it should make me feel. And I think the feeling bit is really the piece that kind of like gets us kind of tripped up when we look at these articles or we look at these hot research pieces, right? Because it's, I think, only natural as human beings to be drawn to like the feeling, right? The feeling of like, what is this going to do for me? How is this going to change my life? I always think it's so funny whenever there's like a new, every year there's a new like superfood, right?
Yeah.
As if like this taking this one thing, like taking ashwagandha is what your life has been missing, and then it'll fix everything, right? When clearly, it's a very nuance and a lot of different factors, as we know as health psychologists. So no, I think it's a really cool point. When did you learn it? At what point did you kind of realize that like, well, I can't just, take things for face value?
Yeah, I think honestly, it really started hitting me near the end of my PhD. Near like, I would say like the third year was like when it really started hitting me after doing a systematic review myself and seeing the amount of evidence and trying to summarize it and keep the nuances, but also come to some sort of conclusion on where something lies. And the conclusion, surprise, surprise, is this is the general direction, but here are a whole bunch of caveats, and here's a whole bunch more research we need to do. And I think that's, for the public, that can be disappointing. It can be disappointing to not have a strong conclusion, but it is what's, staying honest to what the data is saying. And I think it also is something that it's always evolving. And I think that, that's something that we saw sometimes in public health messaging, where, it's evolving as the evidence evolves. So something that we came to some sort of agreement with maybe years ago might change in light of new evidence. And I think that's something that as scientists and hopefully as science communicators, we need to work on communicating, that it's an ever evolving landscape. And
Yeah.
it's not just this was a fact and it will remain this way indefinitely.
Well, I think that's kind of like the main tension between a lot of science communication, how people really perceive research and science. It's like, well, you're doing all of this work and you're being really rigorous about it as best you
Mhm.
can be, and you're finding all these results. The thing that you're finding out of that is surely must be a fact. Surely must be like the thing, right?
Mhm.
And when you say now, oh well, actually, if you don't, we might change our mind, or not change our mind, but we might have new evidence that
Mhm.
changes our messaging. It can be really difficult for almost a little bit like the boy who cried wolf. I think
Yeah.
sometimes where it's like, oh, but you said it was this. Like I changed my mind. Oh, but you said it was this. And I changed my mind, and it can definitely erode some of that trust in science, right? And yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the mistrust in science. I mean, I think we saw many examples of that during the pandemic,
yeah, yeah,
where and in many cases, a lot of those were communication errors, where we weren't able to communicate some of these key ideas in a way that, hey, this guidance might change, whether that be is wearing masks or whether that is, the social distancing piece. Like this might evolve. And I think that wasn't very clear at some moments.
hmm,
And then that caused mistrust. And well, like if they're just changing up what the guidelines
arbitrarily, yeah,
arbitrarily, then
yeah,
it doesn't really feel like it's being driven by evidence. And I
hmm,
think that did a disservice to a lot of the work that was being done. But again, like you said, it's the working with science and communication hand in hand,
yeah,
and also that plain language piece of
hmm,
using plain language to try to communicate ideas and break down concepts early on so you can build that knowledge. I think that's also really important because a lot of science, there's so much jargon,
hmm, yeah.
and the messaging gets lost in that jargon.
What did you say earlier? The cross stressor
Yeah, like the
hypothesis, or
cross stressor adaptation hypothesis,
yeah, exactly,
I'm
right?
doing
Like,
it right now myself. So that's the thing where we're always have to work on ever evolving. And yeah, it's like I learned that lesson in
yeah,
around third year, but I'm still learning um, differences in evidence. And I'm still learning pieces like, for example, like, sure, there's this traditional sense of evidence,
yeah,
but there's also, as I've learned in, outside of research, my traditional research models, lived experience. That's
yeah,
also a type of
for
evidence.
sure.
And we need to make sure we make space for all of these things when we talk about evidence. And I think that's something new that I've learned beyond there. So always learning still.
Yeah, of course. I mean, with the work I'm doing right now, I'm doing quite a bit of qualitative research, quite a bit of
Yeah.
constructivist research, and so the idea that like there's a value to a person's experience, a person's what the story they're telling you, and
Mhm.
that kind of it really just narrows it in, right? Because that person's experience is the only thing that really matters to them,
Yeah.
right? And then when you're trying to then generalize that outwards, that's when I think as you kind of step back, you need to kind of collect more and more voices, more and more data to then kind of make a broader conclusion. But yeah, I definitely see how evidence isn't just like the most rigorous, objective study data that's collected. It really depends on the question you're asking.
Absolutely. The question you're asking and
Yeah.
trying to make research that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing, right? Like, there has been a lot of, research for research sake.
Yeah.
And we want to, challenge that to be like, well, what about research that's meaningful and co-created from the start? So it's aligned with what people want to see from their research. And that's again involving um, people with lived experience and public in the science journey.
Yeah.
I think this ownership
Yeah.
that science is only owned by people who've done PhDs or who've done
Exactly.
research,
Yeah.
I think is problematic. And I think that to your point, like that's why these lessons can go beyond just
Yeah.
that tight framework.
Well, I mean, that's effectively the spirit of this entire like podcast, right? So yeah, I totally resonate with that. Um, and you mentioned something earlier about how evidence is kind of it's difficult for some sort of general people to kind of read an article and get the nuance because the scientists themselves are using these jargon, and to an effect it has to be complicated because things are complicated, right?
Hmm.
But then obviously there's got to be a better way to then make these more plain language, make them the results more meaningful and accurate. Whose job do you think it is to do that?
That's a great question. I feel like there's a role for everyone involved in this.
Okay.
So I think part of it is, I think traditionally, science was done by scientists, reporting on it was done by journalists, and full stop. But I think, everyone learns from being a part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's like PhD students writing, a few years ago, it became a requirement for your dissertation to have a plain language summary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an exercise in itself, right? For you to be able to communicate that. Like you should be able to communicate that to a broader audience. And I think also in terms of same with journalism, right? Like part of it is also like them partnering with a scientist and co-developing, not just like, I read this paper online, I'm going to interpret it through my lens and, send it now as a fact or a news article. So I think it's working together in terms of that job. And I know scientists are going to come with, there's demands on my time. I'm asked to do more and more things.
Yeah.
And that's true. I don't deny that, there are increasing pressures, but I think it's part of our social responsibility, at least in my opinion, to play a role in that development.
Well, I absolutely agree. Like if the spirit of research is ultimately to discover, right, to understand, and then to then share that understanding, I absolutely think it's part of the job to make sure that is done as accurately and as equitably and accessibly as possible. Because otherwise it just stays in, as we well know, the ivory tower of academia, where only like the wizards of professors get to like, share that knowledge and create more and more of it. And it just, I think, just increases the disparity of what we're doing and what we're trying to do with the general public.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's outlets that are doing that now. I mean, you and I both had an opportunity to write for The Conversation, which basically provides that exact piece for scientists and trainees. It's a great opportunity for trainees to write about their research in plain language, have it edited by a professional journalist to help you also, get that snazzy, get those clicks, but still have it, written in a way where you capture the nuance, but you're still getting that public interest piece. Because again, it doesn't do much service if we're just relying on people to access journal articles that are behind paywalls.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Not to bring that can of worms in, but I will.
I saw I was looking at one of my I wasn't logged into my proxy portal to get the access to the articles, and I was just looking for something that I had published, and it's like, oh, if you want access to this article, it's going to cost you like $50 American. I'm like, who's paying for this? Like don't get me wrong, I think I wrote a great article, but I'm not paying $50 American.
$50 though?
No, definitely not. Right? I wasn't even paid $50 American to write it.
Yeah, and I think just going back to that, conversation is that's something too, where it's like, if research is meant to be for the public, right? And we are receiving public funds, might I remind people, to do this kind of work, we owe it to have open access to this information. And I think that's another piece about, if we can move some of these plain language writing models into the forefront in open, free, and accessible ways, hopefully we can fight back against that a little.
I liked how you had that ready to go, open, free, and accessible. That was just like, you've said this before.
Yeah, clearly I have a lot of bones to pick.
For sure. So I got the big question for you now then.
Okay.
If that's your lesson, and the lesson is, be a little bit more critical about the stuff you're reading, we obviously come from a little bit of privilege in that regard because we have the training, we have the experience, we have the network that we can leverage. How does someone who hasn't and maybe doesn't want to do a PhD or higher education take this lesson and kind of, when they see an article, not just succumb to its, the allure of clickbait?
That's such a great question. I think one of the first things is to just stop and think. Before
it helps with a lot of things, actually.
Yeah, that's two large items. But I think one of them is that speed. Like what we talked about earlier, the speed that we're getting information, it's hard to process it.
Yeah.
And they take advantage of that. And I think one of them is to just stop for a second and really take in what you're being told.
Yeah.
Look at where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Is it coming from a reputable source like an organization or something that has a connection to an institution?
Mhm.
Take a minute and look at the source. Are they trying to sell you something?
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a big
that's
one.
another really big piece about it, where it's like, they might be dropping a science fact, and then trying to push a product. So what is the motive? Is the
Mhm.
motive really to spread science, or is the motive to, spread athletic greens? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. So I think those three things, to stop and have a moment to just digest what you read,
Yeah.
look at where it's coming from, and is it a reputable source? Take a Google, look and
Yeah.
see, like, where's the money coming from? Follow the money. Like, that's
Yeah.
a big one where, my own slip up was I didn't see who funded this documentary
Yeah.
and what did they have stakes in? What's their agenda?
Yeah.
And then lastly, circling back to the piece about, okay, are they trying to sell something here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think related to that so much when I see this kind of content and whatnot, being behind the scenes on this side, I understand
Mhm.
how much effort goes into even making like a 1 minute video or like,
Right.
if it's an ad or if it's something I see on my feed, someone may have paid to put that there. And so I always think that like someone put in a reasonable amount of effort to put this in front of me. Why did they do that?
Correct.
Right? Because, yeah, like you said, so much of it is like, well, I want to try and sell you something. I want to try and influence your decision. I want to try and influence maybe an opinion you have about something, which, obviously then is not exclusive to trying to sell you something or whatever.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I really like that. I really like the idea of like stopping, thinking about it, and then double checking like secondary sources effectively, right?
Yes.
I have this like funny story that back in my undergrad, there was this video that came across Facebook, and Facebook was still the big thing, right? So I'm aging myself here, but Facebook was big thing, and it was a video of a guy who like ran across like the top of this like lake and then like fell in eventually. And the whole thing was that they had invented these new shoes where they could like if you ran fast enough, you could run on top of water. It sounds ridiculous. I know. If I have the video, I'll send it to you.
Okay,
But
send it to me.
but he's running across the water, and immediately I send this to like my best friend, and
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, check this out, this dude's running on water. And she sends back something, and she's like, I don't think this is real. I'm like, no, it's totally real. They got a description for it and everything, and obviously it's not real. Like obviously i was
And
I was taking physics at the time, and it's just like I don't know why I thought that would be like
yeah,
a reasonable thing, but I think it just goes to show you that there is no one is immune to it, right?
correct.
No one is immune to not falling kind of victim to misinformation, I guess you could say.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing I want to make sure that, it's not like us coming from a high horse, like we
Yeah.
won't fall for that. Like we do fall for that. Like, and especially, I feel like the use of scientific language
Yeah.
also does that, where you're like, oh, because they're using a scientific word,
Yeah.
now this product is backed by science. I mean,
Exactly.
anti-aging, like that one's a great one where it
Yeah.
like sounds like, okay, that sounds legit.
Yeah.
But then you're like, like aging just continues.
Yeah,
right?
unless you die. So it could just be
Yeah, true.
it just could just kill you and then anti-aging,
Yeah.
right?
Or you have that, right? But I feel like that marketing in itself, and the use of like collagen or using like molecular
Yeah.
language and things like that make you sound like, hey, this product is like science backed.
Yeah.
That kind of marketing can kind of get you. And if you don't take a break
Yeah.
to just assess, and that's happened to me before where I'm like, oh my God, look at this. I'm a big skincare gal. Look at this skincare product.
It shows.
Yeah, thank you. I need to like put this in my cart, like this, they mentioned this reduction here and there.
Yeah.
And if I don't take a pause there, it's very quickly I can be influenced just like that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so funny, right? Because we took, or we learned, I guess, human behavior. Like our whole degrees are in human behavior, and it's like that's how they get you.
That's how they get you. It's so true. It's very effective, tailored messaging.
Yeah,
like it all comes back
exactly.
to those core principles.
That's why I always reject cookies whenever I see them. I always
Yes, reject cookies.
if there's one lesson you take from this, it's reject cookies.
Yeah, forget the lesson I said. Reject cookies. That will help.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Anisa, thank you so much for sharing the time and the lesson today. I think it's incredibly valuable to like hear and like to have that kind of affirmed, because it's something I very much believe in as well. And it's always just so lovely to chat with you. So we really
Yes, I
appreciate it.
appreciate this informal hangout essentially. But I do want to thank you for all the work you're doing to do this. I think it's really important, and you're doing an engaging job as always.
Oh, thanks, Anisa. All right. We'll see you next time, man.
Thank you. Bye.